When I watched that movie, I was quite impressed. I liked how it portrayed Manville in a pretty, almost hopeful perspective. Manville's a good rustic kind of town. It's got a lot of blue-collar appeal. They're hardworking folks. And I know that whenever I bring people into Manville for work or whatever, we all comment the same thing: Manville's got good bones. It definitely has the potential to really get itself going. But the issue of the incessant flooding is definitely a problem. My name is Joseph Anthony Brosnan. I'm a professional engineer in the state of New Jersey and in the state of Michigan. I'm a professional planner in the state of New Jersey only, and I'm also a certified municipal engineer in the state of New Jersey. I would say that flooding has always been a combative force with human existence since the dawn of time. You see tsunami markers in Japan of how far up the floodwaters got so that they knew where not to build. And you see roads called River Road and you know, oh boy, I wonder what happened here. Flooding has always been an issue and we've always experienced it. Nature can generate catastrophes that cause big issues to human society. But from the perspective of, with these added items of climate change, with the added items of increased land development, but also on the flip side, our increased attention to these issues, you find that there's more attention being drawn to this than ever before because there's a sense of it happening more frequently. It's reported more frequently. You now have social media where you can see these things happen instantly. So never before have we had a society that is more aware of these problems as they're happening. And yes, they are happening more frequently than they used to. So is it a new problem? No, but there's a new awareness of the problem. And I think that that's definitely something that we're all waking up to. I went off into civil engineering for focus of land development originally. Worked at a handful of companies and found myself in my current state of employment. My focus has transitioned into stormwater management. I was lucky enough or unlucky enough, depending on how you want to interpret that, as becoming good at my job right around when the new regulations kicked off for stormwater management in New Jersey. So obviously, as all companies do, they set the regulations to the new guy, and I set my mind to learning how they worked and figured out the ins and outs of the New Jersey Administrative Code, specifically 7:8, which is the stormwater regulations for New Jersey. So from a regulatory perspective, I'm the first line of defense as the engineer. Following that chain of command, the county gets involved to a little extent. So if it's a bigger project, the county engineer may weigh in on the stormwater for the site. And if it's really divisive and has a lot of permits, the DEP itself sometimes will step in for those bigger sites, especially if it's in a floodplain or next to a wetlands or something like that. The DEP is the Department of Environmental Protection. In New Jersey, it's our local version of the federal EPA, or Environmental Protection Agency. One of the things that the DEP does for New Jersey is it sets up all of our enforcement for the Clean Water Act, which is effectively how stormwater management even really entered New Jersey's regulatory code. And that's an interesting way to look at it because that angle is all based on environmental quality, not necessarily flood protection. And the code definitely reflects that. And I'm not saying that that's a problem. It's a very real problem that needs to be handled. I think I'm no environmental engineer, but I've heard enough accounts about how the state of every waterway in New Jersey is impaired to some degree, and ultimately that's the main charge of the DEP more than the flood control. But they acknowledge that the answer tends to be one and the same. If you put in a good rain garden, it's going to both help the environment and help property values. The way that code works, even though it stems from and originates from the environmental base, it has that NJAC 7:8. That's what developed that code. And all of those stormwater regulations are overseen by the DEP. at least as far as the borough of Manville is concerned. The borough of Manville sits at the bottom of a 777 square mile drainage area. You'd use the word watershed to describe that. In layperson's terms, a watershed is a bathtub where any bucket of water dumped within it will go to a singular point. For the case of Manville, Manville is the bottom of the drain for that bathtub. The bathtub being 777 square miles large, which brings about a lot of interesting and unique challenges for being a stormwater engineer in and around Manville. And Ida is a very good example of what can go wrong with a watershed that is that big. So the watershed map is the map of Manville within New Jersey, and there's a blue area that indicates all of the upland drainage area that goes to Manville. So in essence, if I living in Highbridge, were to take a bucket of water and dump it in my section of the Raritan River, it'll end up flowing downhill into the river and then down the Raritan River all the way to Manville. The area is substantial. It is 777 square miles. It goes up as far as almost Bud Lake in Morris County. It goes by Princeton. It stretches a very, very large area, and that entire area ultimately drains to Manville. If I were to redraw it, I would have loved to see it sketched across the whole state, because it really shows you just how large a watershed can be. Any drop of water that lands in that area will eventually reach Manville. All told, if you ever want to fix Ida, the best answer would have been to not let the water get to Manville in the first place. Easier said than done, I understand, but that's the easiest way to handle it, is to take responsibility for the water that you're letting out of your site. The stormwater regulations that exist don't really consider watershed planning at a scale that large. They are designed for individual sites and individual projects. They're very engineer coded in that sense, which is appropriate because it's an engineering reference manual. The way that it'll work is that you'll pick your site and you'll have to meet certain criteria: groundwater recharge, stormwater quality, making sure that the water that leaves the site is clean enough to be re-entered into the water stream, but also stormwater conveyance and quantity. Now, that quantity is the one that everyone likes to focus on because that's the one that causes flooding. There are a few different ways to design flood control measures on a site, but often the most common is peak flow reduction. The way that you would analyze stormwater quantity is you'd use a hydrograph. A hydrograph measures the flow over time, so the volume per second of water over time. It's a very funny looking graph. It requires an engineering degree to really understand, interpret, and provide testimony on it. The most important part for a layperson to understand is that the higher that peak flow is, the more intense the flow of water. Think a fire hose versus a garden hose. Those are two different versions of flow. So the way that many developers prefer to use this, and honestly it's a very common practice, is to design this peak flow reduction. So you will analyze your different rain events and you will analyze the existing and final construction of the site, and you'll reduce that peak flow. But what's interesting about it is it doesn't actually reduce the volume of water that comes off. It reduces the flow, but not the volume. And the reason that that's really relevant is because that volume is going to go somewhere. And in the case of the Manville watershed, the answer is Manville. Manville has a very, very, very long time to get water from all of the various parts in. It's going to take many days for all that water to get to Manville, but when it hits, it's all going to hit. Because the river didn't change, it's just those little changes throughout those smaller sites. One of the issues that, if you could call it that, with the NJAC 7:8, is that by still having that, you're still sending more volume down. I identify that as a problem for Manville. It's obviously not a problem for land development, and it obviously does have some positives associated with it. It's cost effective, it's helpful for developers, it's helpful for your local area by making sure that you're making the water leave the site at a certain rate. But when you look at it from a bigger scale, that argument doesn't work as well. And there are some concerns that I have with that piece of it. Is it worth scrapping it? I don't think so, but it definitely requires more brains than have been on it before to make it good and make it better. The company I work for is very big into land development, and I think it kind of goes hand in hand with the difficulty and complexity of this issue, where it's not very easily understood that you can care about economic diversity and development and care about environmental protection because the two are one and the same. It's a resource that can be compromised when you lean too heavily in one side or the other. It's why I think it's important to get multiple different opinions and perspectives at the design table for the policies that we want fixed and adjusted into the future. But many people in the land development scene obviously don't want anything to change, and they are very concerned that I would be too much of a hippie with my responses. And I think I take a very metered and neutral approach to it because at the end of the day, from my perspective, a lot of my opinions and thoughts are formed not really by beliefs, but by what makes the most rational sense. And a world with limited environmental protections is not a very good one to live in. But at the same time, a world with no commerce is also not livable. It's a balancing act. And that is the complication that many people will short-sight themselves to because, oh, if you say one thing, you must represent all of the other things. This is not true. Nuance exists. It's a very complicated issue. I think everyone can simply agree that Manville shouldn't get flooded as much, and the easiest way to do it is to just not have the water get there. But somehow that can even be a political statement. Go to your town's website and download the master plan. If you're in the state of New Jersey, everyone has a master plan. Every town, borough, municipality, they have a master plan. If it's not posted, go to town hall and ask for a copy or get a chance to read and review it. They can be fascinating. They show all of the intents and goals of what the town wants to do, and everyone's got a stormwater master plan. Might be outdated, but ultimately that's a good place to start. And getting your master plans in alignment with everyone else's master plans is just a generally helpful thing. For the purposes of who needs to be involved, it's everyone. It's not just having a professional planner like yours truly sitting at a board and answering all the questions. It's so much more powerful when the residents and the citizens and the business owners are aware of those programs and policies too, and they all work together to engage with it. Think about these problems, become exposed to these problems. Go listen to your town's council meetings, see what things they're talking about, get engaged locally. There are green teams that exist all across New Jersey that are designed to be accessible by lay people. You don't have to be an environmental engineer to join a green team. You just need to care about stuff that's green. Right now, the codes are written by people who are very focused on the stormwater side of it and the land development side of it. I think there's room for additional opinions. For example, a rain garden. To design a rain garden perfectly, yes, we have a detail that's been generated by the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection. Okay, that's great. But different plants are going to have different behaviors in different areas with different soils. Some will be better at absorbing water, and to have someone design a perfect basin, if such a thing even exists, it's going to require many different heads working in concert to make it good. And I think that that's a pretty good microcosm for the larger problem. you're going to need lots of different people involved to make sure that you're getting a good response that considers all the different avenues. It's quite the web. In fact, it's so connected, it's difficult to have intelligent discussions about any one problem because they're all interconnected. Engineering takes a complicated problem with lots of different variables and boils it down to one solution and one equation that you can solve on a chalkboard. Urban planning is as close to an opposite as I've ever found. Urban planning does not necessarily focus on the problem itself, but the interconnectivity of all of the variables. Because you're going to get people like the environmentalists in the same room with the housing people, and they're both valid. They both have real concerns that are real and accurate and industry specific, but they need to start learning how to talk apples to apples with one another. As of right now, it does exist in New Jersey Administrative Code 7:8. There is a provision that allows a regional stormwater plan to be made. To my knowledge, not a lot have been made, if any. They're difficult, they don't have financing mechanisms, they're challenging to build and execute. But it exists. The framework to build one already exists. You just need an entity who's willing to start coordinating up their drainage area to make it happen. That's one option. And that requires no changes. It just requires cooperation, coordination, and education. So changing legislation is ultimately going to be necessary, I think, to help address these problems. No code is perfect. Everything is manufactured by us humans. We're not perfect. Our codes aren't perfect. There's flaws, there's loopholes, there's all sorts of little gimmicky things that exist, and knowing about them is just part of the industry. But without a base of people to draw from who are interested in this, they don't have the firepower necessary to make those changes. If you see this swelling of power from the populace coming up and saying, we want this and we're concerned about these things, whatever they may be, that's how change happens in general. Finding a way to get people educated at a base level will ultimately just help this whole thing get changed at a state level. When I started doing engineering, I looked at Manville post-IDA and I asked the question, how could I solve this? Engineers are problem solvers by nature. I lavished the idea of, how could I fix this? And the answer was, you can't. There's no stormwater basin big enough to retain IDA. There's no amount of dredging that could be done to properly store IDA. And even if you did, it might cause all sorts of other issues. Bypass tunnels and other infrastructure projects, they're all way too cost prohibitive. And even if they weren't, I'm not confident that you'd end up in a result that isn't making Manville a 2.5 square mile stormwater basin. So when I looked at that, I realized that engineering was not the right tool set to approach this, and that's actually what sparked me becoming an urban planner too, because I realized that I'd need a different arsenal, and one of the ways that you could probably do that, I guessed, was doing watershed planning. And watershed planning takes all of those different minds, brings them together, and tries to come up with a comprehensive idea of, well, how do you balance all of these opinions that still achieves basic goals? I think Manville's well suited to engage in that discussion because of where it's located in the watershed. I think that Manville is sort of a prototypical ground zero for a lot of what I suspect is coming. If climate change is going to get worse, and if development patterns continue, you're going to see more flooding like Manville in other places that aren't Manville. How many other working collar towns are on a riverside in the whole country? There's plenty. I can think of Michigan, where I originally grew up. We have similar flooding problems, but not at the scale yet. They have similar watersheds, but they don't have that development intensity yet. New Jersey's one of the most developed states. It makes sense that Manville's one of the first real showcases of this problem. So Manville, looking forward, I think it's important to have an increased focus in watershed discussions and trying to bring those heads to the table to make sure that Manville can flourish in a not floodplain world and hopefully live in harmony with the water's edge and not in fear of it. There was once a phrase, don't ask what the country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. Well, think of it from a stormwater perspective. Ask, what can you do to help this problem, and not how are you going to be helped by this problem? Because all of us helping each other, we're all in the same watershed when you look at it from the perspective of the whole world. So, and especially the condition for Manville. People like to think that the problem that Manville's experiencing is too big or too complicated to solve. It's not. It's quite simple. Make sure that the water doesn't get to Manville in the first place. That starts with being aware of how water moves in your watershed, and it requires you to be somewhat proactive in helping that out. So learn, act, and hopefully we don't have to react.